heard the word reparations from one of you. I think it was from this corner. Thank you, Devin. And we mentioned last week that we would be talking about the idea of reparations.
21 high school students from across Washington, D.C. are gathering twice a week after school for a new citywide course called Real World History.
I like this class because I like the mix of students from different parts of DC, so it's nice to get to know students from uptown schools versus like schools on like the east side.
The course gives students a chance to develop their skill as historians as they learn about the Great Migration of African Americans from the rural South to big cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Los Angeles.
Ida Mae caught a train to Chicago, George caught a train to New York, and Robert drove to California.
The class is intense, but in a good way.
We're learning about real things and like history that's not usually taught in a mainstream history class.
We are asked questions on a consistent basis. We have to do actual research.
High schoolers like to argue. And history is an argument about the past. And our arguments about the past change all the time. And that's one thing I hope that they take away from the class.
Today, teacher Cosby Hunt is opening a conversation about using historical evidence to construct an argument about the present.
So our seminar is going to be about this article, The Case for Reparations, by a gentleman named Ta-Nehisi Coates. What does Ta-Nehisi Coates believe? He believes that there should be reparations for what has happened to African Americans in the American experience. The big question that we're going to have is, how does he use history to make his case?
In his article, The Case for Reparations, which originally appeared in The Atlantic, writer Ta-Nehisi Coates shows how government policies systematically held back African Americans for more than a century following the Civil War.
So for us to be able to talk about contemporary issues, we've got to be able to craft arguments about the past. That's what Coates is trying to do here.
Coates focuses on the Great Migration of the mid-20th century, when more than 6 million African Americans left the farms and small towns of the South in search of better opportunities in cities like Washington, D.C. It's the story of the students' parents and grandparents. But how do you go about making that real?
When I go to this class, I know that I'm going to be learning more about the struggles of my community and how everybody from different parts of the city and their respective backgrounds and what their parents had to do for them to be able to live in DC.
Mr. Hunt actually gave me a picture that actually was a picture of my neighborhood. Both schools that I actually attended are still there, and I did not know that they were built during that time. And I'm kind of glad to say, hey, I went to these historical schools, and they were segregated schools, so they were all black schools during the time.
We need to think about how Coates uses history to make his argument about reparations. And all of this brings the Great Migration into the present. And I think that that's going to help the students see the value of history to their lives.
Mr. Hunt helps the class analyze the writer's opening salvo, 3 quotations. Coates starts with the Old Testament words of Moses, who said that if you had a slave, you could keep him for no more than 6 years.
And when thou sendest him out free from thee, thou shalt not let him go away empty. Thou shalt furnish him liberally out of thy flock. Okay, so the question is, how does the slave master redeem himself? We've got a slave who has worked for 6 years. Now he or she is free. The slave master, what is the slave master's responsibility, Taylor?
It's to bless unto them what God has bless unto them what God has blessed him with.
Such as?
Food, living supplies, like you won't let them go empty-handed because they have worked for you, but now you have to do your part and also bless them with God has given you and make sure that they can go out and be able to start a new free life.
Okay. Openings are crucial. Coates' article is a 16,000-word essay about the entirety of United States history. So he made some very explicit decisions about how to start that article. He could have started with anything. Why did he start with these 3?
This close reading is an important exercise for the students as they learn not just to read, but to analyze and then get some practice at making their own arguments.
This is the idea of reparations, and taking what you deserve is backed up by the beliefs of the people of the past.
That's true, because this is one of the oldest books that we know of. So, the Bible is one of the oldest books that we know of.
So why is Coates using one of the oldest books that we know of?
I agree with what he said, because it's like, okay, even all the way back then, we knew how to treat people, and we know how to treat people. So why don't we know how to treat people? Even back then in Christ's time, they did.
So when you bring the Bible to the table,
It's like, oh, I know
as
that.
part of your argument, for a lot of people that legitimizes
You
what
get
you're doing.
a lot of.
I mean, he's just Ta-Nehisi Coates. Half the people can't even pronounce his name, but now he's bringing one of the oldest books that we know of to the table.
It's like whenever the Bible does get involved, it gets serious. Like, okay, well, you make a point.
After quoting the Bible, Ta-Nehisi Coates turns to John Locke to bolster his argument.
Let's talk about John Locke's second treatise. Today I heard you pipe up when I said John Locke.
No, that was good.
Why, you've heard of him before.
Yeah. Terry, help me.
Enlighten us.
Oh, he was like one of the speakers for the Enlightenment, right?
Okay, he was an Enlightenment thinker. Very good. He was a philosopher. What he wrote about in the second treatise influenced Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson is probably most famous for saying that all people are created equal and deserve life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He got that from John Locke.
The third quote that Coates uses is from an anonymous African American in 1861.
Boom, you've got the Bible. Boom, you've got the guy who influenced Thomas Jefferson.
You're bringing some real hardcore
He's bringing
stuff.
some real hardcore stuff to make his argument more legit. Now, is it not legit to then bring a anonymous source to the table? It's like, oh man, Bible, John Locke, anonymous. Is that? Devin, what do you think?
Well, I think the fact that the two sources before actually show respect to certain things that people believe in. Now, the anonymous quote, I believe, is actually working towards understanding that this thought arose again, more so that it doesn't take a giant philosopher, it doesn't take someone this important to understand that this is a core belief that many people have. If you've been wronged, you should make up for it.
Like Bible, boom. John Locke, boom. And then anonymous, that kind of seems like a letdown, but it's not. Because the anonymous could be one person, but it could be
1,000 people.
1,000. In 1861, there were 4.5 million enslaved African Americans in this country. So that anonymous can represent those 4.5 million people.
After careful study of the opening, the students now follow the story as Ta-Nehisi Coates takes them from the historical injustices of sharecropping in Clarksdale, Mississippi, to redlining in Chicago.
Clyde Ross was born in 1923, the seventh of 13 children, near Clarksdale, Mississippi, the home of the blues.
Many of Mississippi's black farmers lived in debt, peonage under the sway of cotton kings.
The Coates article helps us bring the Great Migration, which ended by the end of the modern civil rights movement, into the present. So the issues of the ghetto, issues of housing discrimination, these are things that Coates gets into that we are dealing with today and living through. Most of the students come from reasonably or very segregated neighborhoods, and now we have more context for that.
Coates' article is helping make history real for these students and empowering them to make historical arguments on their own.
It says that basically in the ghetto, doctors, lawyers, meat packers, steelworkers. If you were black, you had no rights, you had no connections, and you had no way to be able to rise above whatever you were born into as a result of your skin color.
I do want them to see the part of the past in the lives that we live, the neighborhood that I live in, the neighborhood that they live in, the schools that we go to. This is an academic piece that maybe answers some of the questions that they have about why life is not fair sometimes.
Reparations don't just end with giving out money. It also needs to be, there needs to be things that are put into place that show that America has pretty much learned from what it's done.